We begin with history being made in Vatican City today, the first American Pope ever elected in the history of the Catholic Church.
The Pope arrived in an open-top Pope-mobile, smiling and waving at the huge crowds who'd lined the streets there.
At 79, Pope Leo XIV has finally broken his silence, and what he just admitted has sent shockwaves through the Vatican and beyond. For decades, whispers swirled behind closed cathedral doors, with scholars, skeptics, and even some clergy quietly questioning what the Church would never dare confirm.
The grandest event for our new Pope, his inaugural Mass last Sunday, which thousands of clergy, dignitaries, and faithful attended, and millions from around the globe watched on television.
But now, in a moment that's being called both historic and haunting, the Pope has laid it all bare. His confession isn't just unexpected, it's everything the public feared was true. And now that it's out, there's no turning back. Let's dive into the stunning revelation. The old walls whisper differently now. Behind the centuries-old walls of Vatican City, where popes once crowned emperors and empires bowed to the weight of faith, moves a figure who defies every expectation of his age. At 79, Pope Leo XIV does not shuffle quietly into the twilight of his pontificate. No, he walks through the marble corridors with the gravity of tradition and the sharpness of reform. And though the architecture remains unchanged, the air around him crackles with something new, an energy that signals not decay, but transformation.
Well, for the first time in more than a month, the papal general audience was held in Rome, and for the first time ever, it was held by Pope Leo XIV.
Since his ascent to the papacy in March 2021, Pope Leo XIV has gathered responsibilities with a steady hand and unshakable resolve. But unlike his predecessors, who often operated behind tapestries of secrecy, Leo has insisted on bringing light into even the darkest corners of church governance.
As a missionary priest, then bishop, Prevost spent decades of his life ministering to the faithful in one of the poorest areas of Peru, where he is much beloved. And as Frank just said, he now holds dual citizenship in the U.S. and in Peru.
From finance to charity, doctrine to diplomacy, his fingerprints are now found across nearly every department in the Vatican. Not as a silent overseer, but as an architect reshaping the very structure of Catholic leadership. When he assumed greater control over the administration of the patrimony of the Holy See in late 2022, a role akin to managing the Church's vast and sometimes shadowy financial empire, it was clear things would change. Past managers guarded these funds like dragons over gold. But Leo approached it differently. In a closed-door meeting that quickly became the stuff of Vatican legend, he stunned cardinals by saying, "The money of the Church does not belong to marble halls. It belongs to the mission of Christ." What followed was a historic tightening of Vatican banking practices, including transparent audits and public-facing financial reports. No longer would the faithful be kept in the dark about how their offerings were spent. But Pope Leo XIV was never just a financial reformer. His leadership of Caritas Internationalis from 2015 to 2022, before ascending to the papal throne, revealed another layer entirely. Earthquakes in Haiti, civil war in Syria, hunger in the Horn of Africa, Leo led with compassion but demanded coordination. Under his stewardship, Caritas evolved from a loose federation of Catholic charities into a sleek, agile, humanitarian network. He introduced modern management systems, forged ties with secular non-governmental organizations, and yet preserved the soul of the mission. The goal, he said, was to make efficiency a form of love. This relentless commitment did not go unnoticed. In February 2024, beneath the frescoed ceilings of Villa Bonaparte in Rome, the French government awarded him the Legion of Honor, France's most prestigious civilian accolade. But in true Leo fashion, he did not stand tall to bask in glory. Instead, he bowed his head and offered the medal to the anonymous hands who move soup kitchens and rebuild shelters. "This does not belong to me," he said softly, "but to the tired palms that cradle the wounded." And yet despite all this, despite accolades and reforms, reverence and resistance, there lingers a question. One not spoken in conclaves or inscribed in official documents, but murmured in pews and whispered in corridors. But what hidden truth has Pope Leo XIV kept buried all these years? Stay with us. You won't want to miss this. The People's Pope walks a different path. In July 2024, at the heart of Indianapolis, inside the roaring Lucas Oil Stadium, more accustomed to National Football League touchdowns than theological reflection, Pope Leo XIV stood before a sea of 50,000 American Catholics as special envoy to the National Eucharistic Congress. The applause was deafening, but he met it with gentle humility, touching the medallion he wore not as a decoration, but as a reminder of service. For 1 hour, the world felt smaller. From altar to bleachers, from bishops to skeptical non-Catholics, all listened as he tied age-old Catholic truths to the urgent struggles of the modern soul. But even more remarkable than that electrifying moment is what Leo represents behind closed doors. He is the first Filipino pope, the first Asian to rise to the highest office of the Catholic Church. In doing so, he shattered a centuries-old European stronghold on Vatican leadership. In every high-level meeting, his voice carries the experience of the world's fastest-growing Catholic populations, not from palaces, but from barrios, slums, and storm-stricken islands. His presence has brought the margins into the center of power. And yet, Leo XIV is not merely symbolic. He is a bridge, not just between East and West, but between past and future. Fluent in the subtleties of multiple cultures, he has become a trusted figure in interfaith dialogues. In Istanbul, imams have spoken of his quiet respect during joint prayers. In Jerusalem, rabbis have praised his efforts to heal the scars of history. Even climate scientists in Geneva have sought his counsel on moral leadership in the face of global poverty and environmental collapse. That a man once called the bishop who took the bus is now addressed as Your Holiness only adds to the irony. Despite his meteoric rise, those closest to Pope Leo XIV insist that little has changed. Vatican gardeners whisper how he still pauses in the courtyard to ask about their children. Staff tell stories of him arriving early to morning meetings, often carrying his folder and holding the door open for others. His office, tucked inside the Apostolic Palace, remains startlingly unguarded. His door often left open, his time never too scarce for the ordinary faithful. Some say this is a carefully cultivated image, but others know better. In Manila, stories of his past still circulate like sacred folklore. A street vendor, Maria Santos, once recalled how the future pope sat beside her in a jeepney, smiling, asking about her grandchildren. "I thought he was just another kind old man," she laughed, until he got off and everyone bowed to him. Such moments are not nostalgia. They are reminders of the unusual path Pope Leo XIV has walked, one that does not begin in the splendor of Rome, but in the bustling streets of Manila. His way of leadership is quiet, but radical. His style of reform is subtle, but undeniable. And what truly sets him apart is not just what he changes, but how he does it. But what quiet force is Pope Leo XIV using to reshape centuries of church tradition? Keep watching to find out. The gentle storm within the church, and how he does it is precisely what unsettles and inspires in equal measure. Pope Leo XIV doesn't storm the gates of tradition. He walks quietly through them, smiling, but with a resolve that shakes the foundations from within. His way of handling the Church's most divisive issues is a masterclass in balance. He does not compromise the core teachings of the Church, His position on abortion and artificial contraception remains unwavering. Yet, he refuses to wield doctrine like a weapon. Harsh words, he once said at a crowded Vatican symposium in October 2023, have done more to build walls than to guide souls. That moment wasn't a clever soundbite. It was the heartbeat of his leadership. Nowhere is this more evident than in how he speaks about gender and sexual diversity, Catholics, or those who have been divorced and remarried, communities that, for too long, heard only condemnation from the pulpit. At a watershed address in São Paulo in early 2024, the audience fell silent when he said, "Before we speak of sin, we must speak of human dignity. Before we point fingers, we must extend hands." It was not a change in doctrine, but a change in tone. And sometimes, tone is everything. Pope Leo XIV also brings urgency to issues some in the Church still ignore. Climate change, for example. When super typhoons struck the Philippines in 2022 and again in early 2024, he didn't stop at offering prayers. He mobilized dioceses across the country to plant trees, clean rivers, and create parish-based sustainability hubs. Creation is not a backdrop, he told a youth congress in Cebu. It's part of God's design, and it's in crisis. For a man rooted in ancient faith, Leo XIV is surprisingly fluent in modern tools. His Facebook Live sessions regularly pull in millions of viewers. His YouTube channel explains church teaching using stories and humor, sometimes from behind a modest wooden desk with nothing but a Bible and a cup of tea. But he doesn't just broadcast, he listens. Close aides have spoken about how he replies to late-night messages from anxious believers. One woman in Argentina, struggling with her faith after losing a child, received a voice message from Leo himself. Simple, prayerful, and deeply personal. His compassion, however, is most visible where the world would least expect it, on the margins. When urban poverty engulfed Manila in the late 2010, Leo, then still cardinal, turned unused church buildings into temporary homes. He established soup kitchens where the poor weren't herded in lines but seated at tables, given real plates, real cutlery, and real dignity. "You cannot teach people about the banquet of heaven," he once said, "if they've never been invited to a table on earth." Perhaps the most daring act of his papacy is his public acknowledgement of the Church's failings. During a stormy Vatican conference on church wealth in May 2024, he looked straight into the cameras and declared, "We cannot preach poverty while living in luxury." Gasps followed. Some accused him of scandal. Others called it a necessary truth. And still, through it all, he remains as he was, calm, smiling, utterly present. Whether in theological debate with cardinals or joking with cleaners in St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Leo XIV brings with him a kind of authority that doesn't shout. It invites. Not everyone agrees with him, but almost no one forgets him. But what quiet truth is Pope Leo XIV revealing that others fear to face? Keep watching. This will change everything, from courtyard shadows to Vatican light. And yet, for all the boldness he now brings to the world stage, Pope Leo XIV's path began with extraordinary simplicity. Long before the echoes of his voice reached the grand halls of the Vatican, they first drifted through the narrow streets of Méndez Núñez in Cavite. The year was 1982. The sun filtered gently through the courtyard of San Agustin Parish as a newly ordained Father Luis Antonio Tagle, carrying nothing more than a worn-out Bible and a heart full of purpose, stepped onto the stone path that would unknowingly lead to St. Peter's throne. The people who welcomed him that day had no idea that this young, unassuming priest would one day challenge centuries of church convention. But the signs came early. His sermons were tender, thoughtful, more like conversations than declarations. Parishioners began to whisper about the calm in his voice and the weight in his silence. Within a year, that calm had earned him more than just respect. At only 26 years old, in 1983, he became rector of the diocesan seminary in Imus, an appointment that Swift was almost unheard of. But it wasn't ambition that elevated him. It was a kind of moral gravity. His fellow priests saw it, the bishops saw it, and soon Rome would see it too. By 1997, Pope John Paul II had placed him on the International Theological Commission, a group reserved for only the most trusted theological minds. There, under Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who would later become Pope Benedict XVI, Tegel didn't rise by force. He rose by listening. In debates often marked by stern voices and strong egos, he sat with patience, absorbing every word before offering insight that was both clear and disarming. But the real turning point came in October 2001. As Bishop of Imus, he made decisions that baffled even his closest advisors. He refused the comforts usually offered to bishops. He didn't use a private car. He kept his living space sparse. And more than once, he was seen sharing his lunch with the homeless in the rectory courtyard. Local street vendors still recall seeing him sweeping the cathedral steps at dawn, sleeves rolled up, smiling at passers-by who barely recognized the man with the broom as their bishop. In 2009, when violent floods overwhelmed Cavite, he didn't issue statements from a safe distance. He rolled up his cassock and waded through chest-deep water, turning churches into shelters and personally joining rescue missions. That's when the people began calling him the Bishop Who Walks. Then came 2011. Appointed Archbishop of Manila, he walked into a spiritual battleground. The church in the Philippines was under pressure from poverty, from politics, and from a growing sense of disconnection among the youth. But his approach was the same: less preaching, more listening. He met with critics. He held forums with the poor. And he reached across generations with a smartphone, not just a scepter. But it was November 24th, 2012, that made history. Inside the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica, he received the Cardinal's red hat. At just 55, he stood out among a sea of silver hair and rigid faces. But what truly shocked the world wasn't his age. It was his tears. Genuine, unfiltered emotion. In a ceremony designed to show power, Cardinal Tegel showed humanity. And from that moment, everything began to shift. But what hidden burden brought Pope Leo XIV to tears before the world's cardinals? The answer will leave you speechless. From Manila's streets to the Vatican summit, those tears at the consistory in 2012 weren't just tears of emotion. They were the visible ripple of something deeper. A humble man from the Philippines, standing in the red-robed circle of global Catholic power, with the weight of the world's hopes pressing silently on his shoulders. But that moment, striking as it was only the beginning. By December of 2019, an unprecedented call came from the highest seat of the Church. Pope Francis, moved by what he saw not just in intellect, but in spirit, summoned Cardinal Tegel, now Pope Leo XIV, to the very heart of Catholic decision-making, Vatican City. Appointed as prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, Pope Leo XIV took on a position historically wielded by powerful European prelates. But, for the first time in history, its vast authority, the shaping of missions, the appointment of bishops across Asia and Africa, now rested in Asian hands. It was a moment that not only cracked the Church's old ceiling, but also gently redefined it. Then came 2020. In a move that thundered quietly through the marble halls of the Curia, he was elevated to Cardinal Bishop, the highest possible rank among the College of Cardinals. Never before had a Filipino, or any Asian, worn this title. But Pope Leo XIV, with his characteristic gentleness, treated it not as a personal triumph, but as a shared victory for the entire global South. In private, he would often repeat to aides, "This honor is not mine. It is the Church waking up to where the Spirit moves next." Even in these lofty roles, the essence of the man did not shift. Those who worked closely with him at the congregation saw the same habits that had marked his years in Cavite and Manila. He listened before he spoke. He served before he led. And no door remained closed, not even in the Vatican. As one senior official quietly remarked, "In Pope Leo XIV, we saw something Rome rarely expects: authority that leans in, not away." In one unforgettable moment in 2021, during a major Eucharistic celebration, he stood before thousands in St. Peter's Square, but his words did not soar above them. They sank gently into the crowd like whispered prayer. He spoke of the Eucharist, not as an ancient rite, but as bread broken in times of loneliness, wine shared in the hunger for justice. His language was simple, but his voice carried power, the kind that doesn't dominate, but heals. This same voice found its way into homes worldwide through his show, The Word Exposed. There, dressed not in ornate robes, but in plain cassock, he brought theology to life, not in scholarly puzzles, but in real, relatable moments. Viewers felt as if he were speaking directly to them, gently untangling faith from fear and truth from rigidity. Whether explaining the Gospels or urging compassion for the poor, Pope Leo XIV never preached down. He sat beside his audience. And when he spoke on justice, on inequality, on prejudice, on the quiet suffering of the voiceless, his voice carried a different weight. Not that of a bureaucrat or politician, but of a man who had knelt in floodwaters, who had shared tables with the homeless, who had chosen service over status again and again. He was not merely building bridges, he was becoming one. But what made a priest from Cavite rise to shape a global church from Rome? You won't want to miss this. From stethoscope dreams to sacred robes, from the shimmering halls of Rome to the dusty streets of provincial towns, the name Pope Leo XIV became synonymous with hope, humility, and healing. But the world would soon learn that his influence was not confined to pulpits or palaces. Universities from different corners of the globe began to recognize his deep wisdom and unwavering dedication, not with gold or titles, but with honorary degrees, each one a token of gratitude. From Harvard to Salamanca, from Tokyo to Nairobi, scholars and theologians stood in applause not only for his theological depth, but for his relentless pursuit of justice, peace, and understanding among all people. These degrees were not the prize, but the proof. The reach of Pope Leo XIV extended beyond the church walls into the very heart of human dialogue and intellectual progress. Then came the year 2020. A shadow fell over the world as the COVID-19 pandemic swept through every nation and home. Pope Leo XIV, like many others, was not spared. The virus struck him hard, and for a brief moment, the church trembled, not just out of fear for the man, but because of what he symbolized. Yet in what many called a miracle wrapped in medicine and prayer, he emerged from illness with the same humility he always carried. His recovery wasn't wrapped in drama or grand pronouncements. Instead, he chose to speak plainly, sharing with millions his pain, his fear, and ultimately, his healing. His honesty gave courage to families watching their loved ones fight the same battle. His strength gave the church a living example of faith under fire. In hospitals and homes, his story became a quiet anthem of resilience. But perhaps his most groundbreaking work lies in a field where few dare to walk with grace: interfaith dialogue. At a time when differences in belief often led to walls and wounds, Pope Leo XIV chose the harder path: understanding. He did not try to convert or condemn. Instead, he listened. He sat with imams in Jakarta, rabbis in Jerusalem, and monks in Kyoto. He spoke of shared values, compassion, dignity, mercy, and let those truths speak louder than dogma. His presence at interreligious forums was never about grand speeches, but about honest conversation. And somehow, his quiet presence did what force and fear never could. It brought people together. Behind this ability to lead was a rare mix of deep intellect and deep kindness. He could dissect the most complicated theological doctrines with precision, but then pause to comfort a crying child with the same calm authority. Scholars found in him a mind to admire. Ordinary people found in him a heart they could trust. And this, perhaps more than any title, was his true power. His ministry became a shelter for questions, a safe place for brokenness, and a lighthouse for those seeking meaning. And now, as people across the world look upon Pope Leo XIV, the man who moved even the most stoic, stone-faced diplomats to tears, who skillfully bridged the gap between ancient church traditions and the pressing struggles of our modern world, who redefined what it means to lead with a unique blend of grace and unwavering grit, one question lingers in the minds of many. Had this remarkable man always known from the beginning that he was destined for such a sacred path? Or was it something far greater, a divine calling perhaps, that gently pulled him away from the simple childhood dreams he once held, guiding him instead to the very heart of the Catholic Church? For it is a profound truth that the boy who once imagined a future in medicine, dreaming of healing the physical ailments of people, ultimately found his true purpose in a different kind of healing, healing the souls of millions. It was a transformation not just of career, but of life's mission. This journey from youthful hopes to spiritual leadership inspires countless believers and seekers alike, raising deep questions about fate, faith, and the mysterious ways in which a higher power shapes the course of a life devoted to service and compassion. But what do you think draws a humble man from childhood dreams to global spiritual leadership? What can we learn from this simple art of humanity? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.